All right, welcome everybody to another Ideas That Matter conversation. My guest this time is Bob Robinson, and we've crossed paths virtually before. Actually, we were on a panel together for one of the Stoicons. I don't remember, was that 2 years ago, probably?
Yeah.
And so he's got a recent book out, which is sort of the occasion for us getting together to chat about the stuff. But we have a lot in common, as it turns out. So this is the book, The Stoic Habit, and you can find it all over the place. Quite easy to check out. And I did a review of it a little while back. So if you're interested in whether you should get it or not, my answer is yes. And I'll tell you all the many reasons why. But here we're going to talk about things from the book, but also a number of other matters. And one of it is something definitely in the book, I think from the very first pages onward. A good bit of what you have to say comes out of the experience of teaching in prisons. And that's something that we share in common. I've taught in Indiana, North Carolina, and then here in Wisconsin. You were in New Mexico. And every DOC is like its entirely own different animal. Sometimes people have like an idea of prison teaching, and it can be, as it was for me here in Wisconsin, completely online, and they didn't trust the students with much of anything. You couldn't even allow the students to communicate with each other, like in discussion forums. Or it can be face-to-face, as you did in New Mexico for 6 years, was it?
Yeah, about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did in Indiana for 6 years, and then a shorter time in North Carolina. And you learn a lot about philosophy and its portability and its applicability by bringing it into those sorts of contexts. So I thought that might be a good place for us to start. And I'm curious myself, because I don't know what the New Mexico prisons are like. What was the experience like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, to your point, it's I think I learned along the way as I interacted with occasionally with other departments, reaching out about programs and things like that, that I really don't know what the culture is like outside of New Mexico. So I mean, my experience is somewhat is limited in that regard. I think that I had a great time teaching in prisons. I think that it's very common for people to think that it's going to be something different than it is. Like it's going to be hostile and I mean, they challenge you, but they challenge you in a way that's it's really great. I mean, it's the best kind of challenging, right? I mean, they're not going to let you get away with statements that they don't think are true, which is just good philosophy. They just have the kind of personality where they're going to push the point and not and make you argue for it and defend it and present evidence and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I struggled really. I mean, to be frank, I just struggled early on. That I had transitioned from college instruction to correctional education, and I tried to bring over the same skill set, and I had to learn how to make it more applicable because it was just didn't work for a while, and I definitely had to learn a lot of things on the fly. And one of the things that really helped me is just the that Socratic maxim of, you really don't know what you're doing here. So take an opportunity to listen and learn. And in fact, the guys that I taught originally, like for the first groups I taught, they loved the idea of what I was doing. And they love to instruct me on how to teach them. So a lot of the classroom experience was me just kind of being like, I don't know what to say, guys. And they would say, well, let me tell you what to say, because this is what we know and this is our lives. And I found out really early that I really had no experience of the world, and listening and building perspective was absolutely the best thing I could have done. And I didn't know what to do otherwise, because I knew that if I tried to present too confidently, they'd tear me apart. And I just I threw out ideas and I let them work on them and come back and correct me when I was wrong, and just eat humble pie when I had to.
Yeah, I was fortunate in that I taught in a maximum security prison where Ball State had been for over 20 years when I got there. And there was like an entire cadre of older guys who were advising, who'd gone through the program, a 4-year program, and then they'd advise the younger guys back in the cell block. Here's how to do this. Here's how to approach this teacher. You're actually wrong about this. You're actually right about
Mm,
this. And that helped me out quite a bit. And I remember a few of them encountering them and them giving me advice. They'd be like, "Yeah, we heard about you, and here's what I'd like to tell you, young guy," because I was actually
uh-huh.
quite young at the time, 30, fresh out of grad school. No, I'd have been 32. Yeah. Which now looking back on it is young. Obviously, for any young person hearing this, they're like, "Oh, that's very old." But I think it's quite important. There were some people, now that I think about it, who came in with some very, very definite ideas about what prison education ought to be like, and some of them did not flourish in their
Hmm.
prison teaching because they were very doctrinaire about it.
Hmm. Yeah, I also taught in a maximum security prison. There was no real, I mean, I was teaching ethics, and it really hadn't been done in the way that I had done it. There had been some instructors around that I had heard of who had done sections and classes that they were teaching in the
Yeah,
GED classes, who had done some stuff, and they had a lot of success with it. And I had ended up working with some of those guys, because that's where I learned the stories from. But there really wasn't a pathway forward for me, carved by other folks. And so I just, I mean, man, that first year it was just, in the mix, just learning and
yeah,
trying to figure out this culture, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. And I mean, I learned a lot about what doesn't work. And it when I re- I mean, I just kind of turned on my academic chops and just started doing research. Like, I just got to learn what I'm doing, because I had so many uncomfortable moments where I was standing in front of a class, saying, I don't know how to respond to this. Let me do some work and come back to you guys, and I'll get an answer for you on this. And that had never really happened in my academic career, prior to teaching, because I was either years ahead of my students, and we all had similar experiences, so it wasn't too hard for me to find an answer on my feet, or to actually
yeah.
know the answer, because I'd studied it. But when you're talking to a group of people and they're talking about how to deal with a situation that involves a drug debt and this, I mean, the answer is, I don't know, right? I mean, how does this ethical theory apply to this? I don't know. I need to think about this, and I need to be true to your guys' experience, and I'm going to come back with some ideas, and we're going to talk about them some more.
And that
Um,
strikes me as a very different kind of answer than "I don't know, and since I don't know, we're not gonna do anything with this." I mean, what you're doing is much more open-ended, and you're making a commitment to them that we're gonna revisit this and figure it out together.
yeah, and I learned that if I said that, they held me to it. So, if you threw out something and told them that you get back to them about something, if I came back 2 days later, they're sitting there and they're, what'd you come up with? And then they would tell me what they talked about. This is what, so they'd worked on it while I was out.
Yeah,
And then we'd spend 2 hours coming back and joining back into the discussion. And I would tell them, here's what I was thinking about. And it really turned into, um, I mean, the teaching side of it felt like the most real kind of teaching I'd ever done, where I was so much a participant
yeah,
in the process, that I didn't feel like I was doing stand and deliver instruction. And I really tried to do that in college, when I taught in universities. But I think that college students can sometimes feel like, it's really personality based. Sometimes they don't really feel like they want to stand up or speak out in class. They kind of just roll with it. Maybe they just don't even care about the course content. And the small groups we were in, they wanted to know, they wanted to understand, they felt like it mattered. And so I can remember having discussions on, like, early on, I had taught like social contract theory, and working through social contract theory with them, and just the way that they understood agreements, given that their experiences being involved in crime and gangs and all that stuff, it was so different, and they were pressing it so hard, and I was getting to the limits of my ability to work on my feet and having to, revise and revise and revise. But they wanted me to be a part of it. They didn't want it to be where I was teaching them. It was like, hey, we're gonna figure this out together, which taught me a lot about rapport building in prisons. Taught me a lot about how to just teach better.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how maybe I was a bad teacher before I got to prisons. Maybe I wasn't as good as I could have been, because I just wasn't. No one was challenging me and creating the adversities that I needed to grow.
Yeah, I found it was a refining process. I mean, I entered teaching it with some serious anger problems that I needed to work on. And, it helped to knock off some of the hard edges for me. But a lot of the other things that you're talking about, I think are quite common experiences for those who do it well, right? I mean, some people go into teach in prison and it's an awful experience for them. And I was thinking as you were talking about this, so when I would be at academic conferences and people would find out that I was teaching in a prison, and maybe you had similar experiences, they would have usually one of two reactions. And one was, oh, what a waste of education on these deadbeat convicts, and actually some of my family had that point of view as well, which could lead to some interesting conversations around the Thanksgiving table. And, you'd be like, no, I mean, they deserve an education, and this is a really good thing for them. If you want to cut recidivism, there's probably no better thing than education. So, I mean, that's what the studies show, at least for American prisons. Or they'd have this very almost like hagiographic thing. Oh, you're a saint or an apostle bringing this wonderful thing to these poor, misunderstood people who, had a hard time in life. And it's interesting too, because the guys in my prison would say, we're going to tell you about our cases, and I'm not innocent, and I didn't get caught for these other things that I did over here. But if I'm talking to the judge or the chaplain or a reporter, I didn't do any of this stuff. So you get kind of an in with them, and they're more real with you. And so there's that going on. And then, it is different than teaching students in a traditional university or college classroom. Sometimes people would make jokes, and I actually got kind of sick of this joke. Oh, you've got a captive audience, right? And I think that's exactly the opposite. Our service classes that we're teaching at a university, intro to philosophy, ethics, or stuff like that, they're a captive audience. Most of those kids don't know why they're there, other than their advisor said, you got to take this class to satisfy your core gen ed requirements. They might be scared to take a philosophy class, which is my experience at a few places that I teach, or they just resent it. They're like, why do I have to screw around with this bullshit when I just want to do nursing or engineering or whatever. Whereas the prison guys, they have a clearer perspective that, hey, this is an opportunity for me, and I don't want to waste it. I mean, it's very easy for young college students to waste the opportunities that they have to interact with us about the things that we bring to the table. The guys in the prison, at least some of them, a good bit of the time, and enough of them to model for other guys. Well, and you also taught women too, I think, right?
I did.
They could have a different attitude of, well, here's a shot for me to get something that I wouldn't normally have access to. I better take the opportunity I'm being offered, right?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because one of the things that was a bit different about what I was doing was that the Secretary of Corrections at the time, I was brought in to actually teach ethics, but it wasn't part of any college program. So what he wanted me to do was just go out and essentially recruit people in the maximum security facilities to be part of these classes.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't have I don't know what to call it. I just didn't have there was no prior recruiting. There was no prior incentive. So, I would just go out to, we would start by identifying who we thought would be good people. Like, there's a lot of guys in prison who are intellectuals and smart, and they want to talk about ideas. And so when I would work with unit managers and stuff like that to identify good individuals or receptive people. I would go talk to them I would literally go to their door and ask them, hey man, I'm interested in doing a course. All we're going to do is talk about what it means to live a good life. And I don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, you guys know prison, you guys know people get moved around. We're just going to try to get your tier in. And if your tier, the guys in your tier are interested, then we'll set up a group of 6 and we'll teach.
So very small.
And so very small, often 6, sometimes 12. And it depended on, prison dynamics and units and things like that, and how things were working that way. But so we would just set up these groups, and often, they didn't know what philosophy was. They thought it was psychology, which is, a pretty normal confusion. But I would tell them, we're not here to talk about feelings. We're not doing therapy. I want to talk about ideas. And so then we would start, and my first day, I would just ask them, what do you think it means to live a good life? And they would throw out their ideas, and the first day would just be discussion about, the things that they would suggest, money, pleasure, like all of those things the Stoics identify as externals. And then the other things they would latch on, they would quickly, even in that first discussion, kind of start, drifting into, well, there are other things too that are important, like character traits. And so we would just start opening it up, and I would often have a plan for how I wanted the course to go, which they would quickly decide that wasn't what they wanted to do that day, which is actually one of the things I loved, and I really loved to appreciate about working in the prison environment, was that I would teach something, and then they would keep the discussion going in the unit, and then I would come back and I would have a plan for what to teach that day, and 2 hours later I'd be like, I would joke with them, I mean, guys, I didn't get through any of my material I wanted to do today, and they're like, that's cool, because we just like being here. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience in that regard. I had to develop very grassroots interest. And once I had done some classes, and they had gone well enough that word started spreading. And so I would be coming in to teach, and guys in the yard would be out doing their thing. They'd be like, hey man, what's up? Like, I heard, you're teaching that class. Like, how can I get in that class? And I would then try to be like, well, what unit are you in? Let me talk to your unit manager. And we would try to set up more classes that way. And so I just kind of became like a philosophical salesman in some way, where I was out just trying to get interest. And, to be fair, like there's always people that are just not going to be interested in the conversations, and to each their own in that regard. But my experience was generally that those small groups worked pretty well. I learned a lot about how to interact and make sure that I was treating them according to the concept of respect that they held, rather than necessarily the one I held. But yet understanding that is also negotiable, and we needed to work out that very concept. And it was just a good time. I don't teach currently in the prisons anymore, and it's something that I do miss. I'm interested in getting back in one day and trying to do it differently. But yeah, I mean, when you talked about like, oh, you're these guys are lost, or you're a saint. On the lost side, I mean, it's obvious. No, if you go look at dollar for dollar what works, the best investment that the public can make in correctional programming is education. It's going to cost us less. I mean, just from a dollar perspective, let alone a human perspective, it just costs us less money if we are investing upfront in their education, which has a lot of, that hits a lot of people wrong, but it's the farther they can push into education, the higher they can go. It just, the data says that recidivism nosedives.
Oh, I know.
And on the other side of the coin, the saint side, I used to joke with the guys, that thank you so much for coming in. We people would say that. And I would say, I'm getting a paycheck. I'm not doing this for free.
Yeah.
So like, I'm having a good time, but also like, I got bills to pay too. And I think that they appreciated that honesty, that I wasn't, yeah, guys, like I'm some moral hero. I'm like, look, I trained to do this. I want a paycheck. Here I am doing it. Let's have a good time, but understand, like, I'm here also because I'm an
Yeah.
employee. And
Now that I think about it, because I got to interact with the other instructors quite a bit, and there were about at its height there were over 100 professors at Ball State who were in the extended education, but it was spread over like 11 prisons.
oh,
But
wow,
we'd get to
that's a
know
lot.
each other, and I think if I remember right, so there might be a little bit of narrative monkeying around here, but
Mhm.
there were some people who, when they talk, like in the orientation or when you're going in, because you'd all go through the front gate at the same time, you'd get the sense that they thought they were moral saints by coming to the prison.
Mm.
They didn't last long. I don't think that what would we call it, comportment or self-understanding is very sustainable, you know.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that um, prisons do really well is they flesh out the environment is tough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very accommodating in some ways, but it's also very tough. And I think that if you're not willing to, I'm not really sure how to put it, but if you're not willing to be exposed a little bit and to deal with it, it's going to get rough.
Yeah, yeah.
I had an experience where I made a mistake with a group. I just didn't handle things in a way that were I dealt with them in a way that I thought would be the most productive, but I think that it wasn't the way that they would have wanted it to go.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's still not that bad. I mean, I think
well,
about some of the screw ups that I made.
yeah, but I mean, I lost the group. I mean,
Okay.
I lost my trust with them.
Okay.
And that one hurt. I mean, that one stung. I really liked that group. They were really fun. They were doing, they were really engaged. They were really pressing me, making good arguments, and we were just challenging each other and just generally having like a good time. And I made that mistake. And I think that, I realized as I made that after that, I asked them what happened. And they explained to me what I did wrong. And it stung. And I could have broken one way on that, but I sort of looked at it and I was like, man, I can't lose trust. I mean, trust is all that matters in prison. And so
Yeah.
if you don't do the thing that builds trust in a correctional setting, you're going to lose people because they are so equipped to flush that out and to expose you. And it's not that they're looking for it necessarily. There are some of those types, but it's just that there's so many opportunities to make mistakes. And if you don't deal with them in the right way and own them, then they're going to not trust you, and then that's going to create a distance, and then eventually they're just going to quit on you if they see enough of it. I mean, I was late once to a class and it was my fault, and I walked into the group and a guy just sort of looked at me, "You're late," and I said, "Yeah," and he said, "Why?" And I said, "I didn't manage my time well." I mean, I wasn't gonna start making excuses. I knew what I needed to say. And I had to say, well, this is something that I struggle with. I'm not a great time manager, and I need to work on it, and I owe that to you guys because this is your time. And I kind of got, I mean, in some ways those commitments were really good for me because I couldn't hide behind excuses, and it really helped me. I learned a lot about myself and just what I owe people and how to honor commitments better. And a part of my character that I think needed some work that I probably wouldn't have been able to work on had I not had people who were willing to hold my feet to the flames like they were, which I really appreciate in retrospect. I mean, I grew a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Hey, let's shift topic to talking about the book a bit. So one of the things that I mentioned in the review is that I really like the way it was laid out, which to me made a lot of sense. And you were saying that you had to kind of determine how this was going to be set up. You begin with some basic Stoic ideas. What is an external? Why do people screw up? Well, it's largely ignorance, living in accordance with nature. And then you get to virtue, which is absolutely central. One of my pet peeves is that in a lot of the popular stuff about Stoicism, there's not a lot of talk about virtue. And I think, well, that's kind of a big mistake. And so you outline the virtues and how they're supposed to work and connect up with things. And then you get really into let's call it, you get under the hood, right? How do you actually become virtuous? Well, it's not by memorizing the 4 cardinal virtues and rattling them off. You actually have to rework your habits, which means you have to understand how habits work. And you even have a whole chapter specifically on one key aspect with habits, routines, which is really important. And then the book finishes up by hitting on 4 particular areas of what the Stoics call externals, things that are, they have value, but they're not genuinely good. Pleasure, status, wealth, and health. And those seem to be the most important, the broadest ones. We could think of other externals as well. So it seems like a really thoughtful exposition in how you structured it, which is, again, different from a lot of the popular literature out there. How did you arrive at that? What was your thought process for setting it up that way?
Oh gosh, sometimes my own mind is so foreign to me, especially in retrospect. Well, thanks for the kind words about that. I really wanted to understand, and I think when I got into Stoicism, it made an immediate impact on me in the sense of specifically the concept of which I think draws in a lot of people to Stoicism, the maxim that it's not events that upset you or elate you or whatever, however we want to construe that principle, but it's the judgments, your own judgments. I understood that, but I really wanted to understand. I had enough experience at that point dealing with myself and really grappling with my own flaws, and then dealing with people who also were grappling with their own flaws, that I wanted to understand this. Like, okay, so it's not our judgments, and our judgments are up to us, but like, it doesn't feel that way to me sometimes, it really doesn't. And I wanted to understand why it is that, although our judgments are up to us, why does it really feel to me at times that it's a struggle and it's a fight? Because on the one hand, Stoicism kind of promises you this freedom up front. But one of the things that I think just doesn't get talked about enough is, okay, it promises you this freedom. And sometimes you see this in online discussions, or sometimes if I jump on like the Stoicism subreddit or something, and I'm just kind of perusing, you do see people grappling with this. Hey, it says this stuff is up to you, but here I am failing and I can't figure it out, and I don't know what to do with stuff. And initially that's kind of what I felt. It was like, this is true, but yet I don't know what to do with this. And so I started working through the different, I see Epictetus kind of constantly laying out these ideas, these externals, they have a grip on you.
Yes. Yeah.
And so one of the things that you get in Stoicism is especially the practical Stoics, right? I think of Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius as being very practical. And there's obviously a tradition that's maybe not as practically focused, but more sort of metaphysical and logical and all that stuff. But the practical Stoics that we've inherited, the documents that we have, they lay out a picture of which here you are, and you have the capacity to be virtuous, but yet so many people aren't, and so many people are failing to be so. Well, there's got to be an explanation. And they say ignorance, but I really wanted to understand, like, what is it about us that is leaving us in the spot of ignorance, where we have these judgments, they're bad, we're trying to figure out how to be virtuous, and we can make some headway, but it's also really challenging all the time. And so I caught on to, in discourses, I had caught on to, as the idea for the book had had started emerging based on that modern Stoicism. That talk I gave in 2024. I had been reading a lot of Daniel Kahneman. I'd been reading a lot of psychology at the time, and I noticed that there's this correlation, and I hadn't picked up on it at first when I'd read Epictetus for a couple of years, but he talks a lot about effort, and it struck me that here you have these psychologists who are also talking about effort, and a lot of our biases are essentially ways to cut down on effort. And Epictetus is here talking about, like, even I think it's at the beginning of it might be Enchiridion. I don't know. I'm not great at remembering passages and things like that, but he says it's not going to be any small effort to become a good person, which essentially tracks with the psychology, right? The psychology is saying, look, you have all of these things that help you make quick decisions, but they're not always going to be the best ones. And in our experience, even when we talk about people, we talk about a lot of people who make mistakes. They're not necessarily bad people. They've just like made these mistakes. And so what is it about us that we can be decent a lot of the time, but then put in difficult circumstances or adversarial type circumstances, we go on and make these mistakes? Well, there's got to be something that's drawing it out of us, something in there. And I started to connect the concept of externals to that concept of effort. And, it's these things like wealth and status. And they're really they're built into us, these desires. And our minds are really aimed at wanting these things, desiring these things. And
we see everybody else around us doing it too,
Yeah, totally. We're all susceptible to it. It's just built into our nature, and for a good reason. But yet the structure of it is that we effortlessly kind of pursue these things. And the role of reason is to kind of get in there and sort it out, to do it in a way where it doesn't become self-destructive. And we're willing to make the decisions that are actually the best decisions for us. And so I started to make that connection really through that concept of effort. And I wanted to, one of the things I wanted to do in the book was to kind of point out, Epictetus was onto this a long time ago. The psychology, and I'm not sure this came out kind of in the book maybe as much as I wanted to, but the psychology is often just playing catch up to the Stoics. And a lot of those ideas are there. And here you have Daniel Kahneman and a lot of other people talking about just like we're innately lazy and we're trying to conserve calories a lot of time. And here's Epictetus basically saying, like, look, being a good person is going to take a lot of work, man. Like you're going to have to dig in and do work that your brain just doesn't want to do, because you can always take the easy way out. And your brain is basically telling you to do that. He doesn't frame it that way, but he talks about it. And so I really wanted to draw out that connection, because it really helped me frame Stoicism in a way where, now I really understand what the battle is. What the battle is in our hearts. And I had taught some of that stuff in prisons, and it tracked pretty well. So I kind of just went back to my roots, and I was like, I want to write the book that was in my head when I was teaching in prisons. I wanted to write that book, and I didn't have anything. I had very limited notes, because like I told you, I would go in and teach and everything would just get, discombobulated. But I really wanted to write that book, and I wanted to write the book that I felt was true to me and true to what I taught in prisons, which is why there's a lot of confessional stuff in the book. But also, I needed to explain things to the people I taught in prisons that I didn't feel like I was cheating them on some of the really hard questions. And so I ended up, teaching them a lot of scientific methodology, and just to help them learn how to think about evidence and things like that. And I found myself talking to them about things like biases, and we would pull it out and talk about it, and then we would kind of discuss it in a Stoic fashion. And I had talked, when I talked to my editor, when things were kind of unfolding, I was like, I just want to write the book that was what I did in prisons. Is basically how I framed it. And so that's kind of what I tried to do to the best of my ability.
Well, so we were talking before we started recording about the publication process and writing, and you had mentioned that you had a pretty narrow window for actually writing the book, which is, again, pretty impressive. It would be an impressive book if you'd had a year, but you said roughly 4 months to get it
Yeah.
done, and not just the writing, but all the notes and stuff like that. So, it's got a lot of really great structure. Each of the chapters belongs where it is, which is quite important. Some books are kind of a jumble that way. Now, how did you get it knocked out in 4 months? That is a very short turnaround time. It'd be different if you were like writing, I don't know, some pop psychology book about, and you just let's make up some case studies and apply it. But that's not this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I didn't have a lot of material written. Some of the material I had thought a lot about in chunks. I
Okay.
hadn't worked out. So like, the material in the chapter on wealth and health, those two chapters, I had worked out some of those ideas because we talked a lot about health and wealth and status and all that stuff in prisons, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I had worked out a lot of those ideas, and sort of in very broad concepts. And I needed to go back and do original research for that. But so I appreciate that you called it impressive. It felt very hard at the time. I had
Oh, I
actually
imagine.
also
Yeah.
I'd also started a new job that January, that I was learning, and then I was also in the midst of starting a business. So I
Ooh,
was very overwhelmed,
yeah.
and the first thing I told myself was that I'm going to take a shot at this, and it's going to be as good as it's going to be, and I'm going to be happy with whatever the results are. Shout out to my editor who absolutely was shepherded me through like the whole process. And the at the 4 month line when I gave them the drafts, I mean, I had sent a lot of drafts, but gave them the sort of, this is my final version, and getting back the notes. I mean, that was all very incredible and helpful. But I literally just wrote a ton of stuff and just kept revising it. And
Yeah.
I would work in the evenings. I'd work on weekends. I'd wake up early. I didn't sleep a ton. But I really tried to keep consistent routines. I tried to keep up like my exercise and
Okay.
tried to get to sleep, tried to spend time with my family. And I was thinking about it while I was writing, and I have a paragraph in the book where I say this, like, if I'm going to sell out everything I believe for this book, it's just none of it's worth it. It's going to be as good as it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I have, even to this day, I mean, after it's come out, I do have to practice, I gave it the best shot I could under the circumstances I was in. I feel like I did my best in the time that I had. Any criticisms I get based on that time frame, totally probably legitimate, and I accept them because I'm not sure I could have done better. I'm one of those people who works with timelines. Like if someone doesn't give me a timeline, I'll procrastinate the hell out of it. And so for me, having that timeline actually motivated me, and I need a little bit of that fear for me to like,
Okay.
that really kind of compels me, and I start working out ideas really well. So I'm not really even sure. Could I have done better? If a year, I might have just squandered the time and written the same book. I don't know. It's very hard for me
Well,
to know.
it's interesting with the like, could it have been, incrementally improved or something like that. I saw it wasn't a meme, but I turned it into a meme, I think a couple weeks ago. And I think it was from like Ultimate Guitar or something. And it had an old picture of Cliff Burton and James Hetfield from Metallica from around the release of Master of Puppets. And somebody's not just a person, but people were accusing them of having sold out and being posers. And then like the caption was, Cliff Burton says, I mean, if you think we're posers, then, whatever. And I was like, well, that's the perfect response to that, because I mean, it just goes to show you like one of the greatest metal albums ever made, right in the
Mm-hmm.
heyday, one of the high points of the band itself. They're firing on all cylinders, and there's still going to be some jackass who's going to be like, "Oh, this sucks," So you can't bulletproof anything.
Totally. And I know that there's, I've gone back and looked at sections, and I'm like, yeah, I would have said that differently, or maybe said that better had I spent more time on it, but those weren't the circumstances I was in. You can only do so much. You only have so much energy, so much.
Yeah.
And I learned hard during my dissertation.
Oh,
One of the mistakes I made in my dissertation was thinking that if I worked more and more and more, I would write better and better work. And I
yeah.
was nearing the end of I think I was starting my last chapter, and I was starting my last chapter on the day I had told my dissertation advisor it was due. And I was out of my mind. I had a nervous breakdown. I called him and I said, I can't do it. And he was so gracious, and he was like, I mean, you picked the timeline. Like, you don't need to keep it. We're fine. We're just extend it, and we'll go with it as it goes. And I took a bunch of time off. I took like a month off, and we went up to at the time I was living in Southern California. We went up the coast of California, and I joked I was just vegetative on the beach, just staring at the ocean for a while, just clearing my head. And I learned during that time, it's definitely not true that the more you work, the better work you do. Like, I needed to take time off. I needed to focus on. I was not sleeping well. I was drinking way too much caffeine and not getting good sleep from it. I was spending all my time working on it. And then I was also like highly distracted because I was spending so much time working on it. I couldn't keep my thoughts organized. And when this book came up, I mean, I was very intentional. I'm not going to make that same mistake. I was really unhealthy during that time in my life. And I was also not making good decisions because of it. And I'm not going to do that to my family. I'm a grown man now. Don't be a child anymore. Like, do what you need to do, and make the right choice, because you're going to be writing on it, especially. So I learned the hard way that more work does not equal better work. And I learned that take time to relax, take time to recuperate, to exercise, eat well, all that sort of stuff that we know from from the evidence and from the research. And so this time around, on this book, I tried to live that stuff as best as I could. There were times where my anxiety got the better of me, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep, so I'd go write. And just writing and getting it out of my head made me feel better. And sometimes I would get up and read just to, and I fortunately, I was able to, I don't know, just not make too big of a deal out of it, like I did with my dissertation. I mean, I definitely made too big of a deal out of it. I was way too status involved, way too, my entire life depends on this. And with this book, I saw it as a gift because of the way that it came about. So one of the things I told myself was that, it's a gift. Just treat it like that. You don't owe your future self anything here other than doing your best work. If it fails, it fails. You'll go back to living a fine life like you were before.
I think it's tough with dissertations because you're in that milieu of professors and graduate students who are often like jockeying with each other. And there's that whole like crazy notion that, you should be making some original contribution to the research. And it's precisely the wrong time for you to be doing so, right? I mean, we'll do that in our 40s, 50s, 60s, right? After we've matured enough and we actually have read enough stuff to do that. But you've been on this like marathon trek through the literature of whatever problem you're supposed to be working on. And so, I mean, I went through that myself. I've talked with so many other people who are like, if I could do it again differently, I would have done things like this. And, for me, like the only really good advice that I got from any of my committee was one of the guys would occasionally remind me, the only good dissertation is a done dissertation. Just get the damn
Best
thing
advice
done.
I got.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's this pressure too. It's supposed to be like your magnum opus. No, you don't write a magnum opus when you're essentially a kid, just, a few years out of college. You write it, when you've had decades to meditate on these things.
Yeah, I feel like I barely got through.
What did you write your dissertation on, out of curiosity?
I wrote my dissertation on the Kantian influence on Michel Foucault.
Oh, okay.
at one point I considered just writing on Kant's ethics, but
Yeah.
I for a variety of reasons I ended up not going that route. Some of which I regret, but I ended up yeah, I mean I was very interested in I think at that time I was just very interested in ethical decision making, and
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I was kind of still interested in concepts like power and those sorts of things, but also in just like traditional moral theories. And so I ended up writing on some of that stuff and ended up being historical. Honestly, it was very I was really trying to figure out what I was even trying to say in my dissertation for like most of it. Um, but yeah, I mean, someone recently pulled it off a shelf, and I was like, man, I have not thought about that in a long time. It's been like 15 years since I thought about that.
Yeah. Mine ended up being this sprawling, not entirely coherent work, about 350 pages.
Oh wow,
And
yeah,
really, it was like three different projects that I was trying to do. In retrospect, you don't know this at the time, right? When
yeah,
you're
for sure.
in the middle of it. And then, you're supposed to like turn it into your first book. And I got it finished and I was like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with this. I think I mined like one chapter for a conference paper and that was about it. And then I moved on to other stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, fortunately for me, I wrote on somebody who is kind of obscure. So that wasn't going to get me any jobs or invitations to things. So it was, I could move on to something that maybe people had actually read.
Mm-hmm.
So
Who did you write on?
I wrote on this late 19th and early 20th century Catholic philosopher in France, Maurice Blondel, who's really quite
Okay.
good. Although he's not a great writer, he's sort of like Hegel in that respect, or Kant, where you're like, this
Yeah,
could have been
rough.
expressed a lot better,
Yeah.
but the thoughts are really great. And he was kind of a big deal at one time, but a lot of, this happens in history. There's a lot of people whose thoughts are really worth exploring, but nobody reads them anymore. And
Yeah.
there's actually with this a little bit of digression. There's like a vicious cycle that has to do with translation. So if somebody's not writing in English and not much of their work has been translated, well, most English speaking philosophers aren't going to read them because they're not going to read stuff
Mm-hmm.
in the original. And so then, the perception is, well, they're not important enough because they're not part of the conversation. So then there's no attraction to like translating their work. Like if you found a
Right.
new work by Foucault, you could translate it and people would be like, holy crap, this is amazing. Or imagine
Right.
if you found a new work by Kant somewhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, people would be all over that, right? But if it's somebody that not a lot of people know, I've translated some of Blondel's stuff. But there's not a huge demand for that sort of thing out there. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah. I actually tried to teach Kant's ethics in prison,
How did that
and
go? I mean, I did as
not.
well.
Uh, I mean, obviously Kant's a very hard philosopher to frame.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things I learned that was very hard in prisons was bringing in original work and asking them to read it. I mean, especially, you know, 18th century German philosophy. Like
Yeah.
it's most of us can't figure out what's actually being said. That kind of, I quickly was like, well, let's just talk about the ideas. So here's the idea. I mean, it was funny. It didn't. I mean, they liked it. It's hard for me to know if they liked it because it was just getting to talk about the ideas.
Yeah.
But I found that when I started talking, when I switched from doing more traditional philosophical works to talking just about Stoicism, one of the things that really jumped out to me was the difference between there's these theoretical questions that we can spend a lot of time arguing about.
Yeah.
But then there's these practical questions, and they were very, very much more drawn to the practical questions. And they actually were satisfied with having the theoretical uncertainty about ethical foundations when they knew on the other side, there's this kind of, one of the things that I would say to them a lot and I'd say this generally when I teach Stoicism, to me, it just is sort of like one of those just simple Stoic kind of mnemonic devices or rules, which is that, you're ultimately the one that has to live with your choices. The theory doesn't, you do.
Yeah.
And so they felt pretty good about having some of those unanswered, really deep philosophical questions that, we can pose and talk about endlessly, like trolley problems and, Nazis at the door and that sort of stuff that we're all trained to think about. But, being the one that has to live with the choice, there's this sense in which what it does is it really, really makes ethics feel personal. And obviously it is, because it's ultimately about all of us, but also about, you and me and our own lives. That I think that they didn't really worry about the theoretical questions were less important to them, because they understood that, hey, whatever I choose, I need to choose well, because I have to live with the consequences. And Stoicism is nice because it has that simple test, right? If you don't like the consequences of what you've chosen, that's a pretty good indicator that it's not aligned with with who you should be. And they jumped on that so much faster than any of the, teaching Mill or teaching Kant or even teaching like a more Aristotelian approach.
Okay. I was wondering about other virtue ethics stuff.
I taught all of those, and I would teach social contract theory. We talk about I would get into some of the my academic skills are going to fail me. Some of the, what are they? I forget what they call them in the ethical theories, but like the psychological egoism, whatever that category of. We would talk about some of those ideas, because a lot of those ideas are they're really prevalent, completely separate from theories, ethical theories. So we would talk a lot about some of that stuff. But what I learned is that when we would talk about Stoicism, we would end up talking a lot about some of that stuff anyway. Because they would just naturally bring up the arguments. And so I didn't need to teach them directly. Let's talk about Stoicism,
like meta-ethical stuff, like
the meta-ethical views.
Is emotivism the case? We're all just kind of BSing.
We talk about some of those views as well, and I think they liked it. I just think it didn't matter to them.
Well, I think that's in part because a lot of those things don't matter to most of us, and it's intensified there. I also tend to think that the distinction between meta ethics and then whatever you want to call it, descriptive normative ethics, is actually BS, because every meta ethics has sort of like prescriptive implications. And then, like when you read Kant, it's not like Kant wasn't doing meta ethics. He tells you why every other theory is wrong and how they misunderstand themselves. And Mill does that too. So, each of those traditions has something like that. But a lot of people, they act almost like, well, if you don't have the meta ethics down, all of this other stuff is crap. And that's completely reversed, right? Because you got to have something substantive that you can actually use for guiding what you're going to do today. Before, I suppose down the line, maybe you could figure out which meta-ethical theory is the most plausible.
I also am just a little bit through and through a pragmatist. I'm quite fond of William James.
Me too. Yeah.
And so when I got into prison teaching, I was not pragmatic, and I learned that, maybe one of the problems I was having was I wasn't just being true to myself, and that I could just dig into some of these, just take a more pragmatic approach. I think Stoicism got me there. But part of, the way I framed the book too, was trying to be very pragmatic, which is that people want to be heard. Most of us are not walking around talking about ethical theories, because the only really those who are us trained philosophers who are interested in it. But most people, like, having done this for a long time, when you talk to people about ethics and you start to get into theory, you can see them glaze over and just of like, this doesn't help me figure out what I'm going to do, when it comes to this problem and this problem, this problem, because like no amount of trolley problem is going to help you deal with these things, but like real practical life issues. And so one of the things I really wanted to pay honor to in the book was just like, let's just deal with ourselves. I'm like, what's really going on with us when we're thinking about some of these things? It's not that we haven't figured out our theory. It's that, we kind of get at an intuitive level, like, because you see it all over in movies, you see it in books. People want things like money, and they know they're going to get into some quandaries of what to do. Like, when do you talk to people and they'll tell you, I pursued a raise and I felt really upset by this and this thing. And you can see that there's an ethical problem that they're working on. But sorting out a theory at 30,000 feet is really not going to help them solve that problem. What you need to do is help them frame the problem to start with, and then work back and sort of elicit what the underlying values actually already are there. And one of the things that to me is so beautiful about Stoicism is it does, you kind of get this at your core, what's going on here. You just need to dig in and sort it out a little more inside you and see what's going on there. And then the problem is for you to figure out. It's not for a theory to sort you out, because a theory is not really going to do that. It's for you to deal with this problem. And what is going to make you resolve this problem in a way where you feel good about the outcomes? Well, let's talk about what would it even look like for an outcome to feel good. Like, if you get more money, but you hate yourself more in the process because you did a coworker dirty or something like that. Like, you're going to spend a lot of effort working out how you're a good person in your head, but in reality, you're going to have some cognitive dissonance. And so to me, Stoicism, it's so nice because it starts kind of in the mess rather than it starts in the theory. Let's start in the mud.
I mean, Epictetus, right? So when we teach intro to philosophy, where does philosophy begin, right? So Plato, Aristotle, wonder, look at all this really cool stuff, and we're trying to figure it out. And Epictetus is like, philosophy begins with realizing that people are telling you all sorts of contradictory stuff, and you don't know which of them are right, and you got to sort that out because you actually have to make some decisions now. I'm more attracted to that. I mean, I know technically, wonder's great. It is a legitimate way to go, but I mean, I think I got into studying this stuff in part because of that. And another aspect, I'm curious to bounce this idea off of you. One term that Epictetus uses quite a lot that gets translated typically as contradiction, but it's better translated as conflict, is mache, right? And you want to look at what you call the cognitive dissonance. So that would be like one kind of that where we particularly feel it. But there can be all sorts of machi within us where what we're doing just doesn't make sense. It makes sense locally here and here, but we try to put it together in a life and it doesn't make sense, right? And a significant part of Stoicism seems to be not about the ideal of eliminating all possible contradictions once and for all for every one of us. Even the sage, interestingly, Seneca says they need another sage to point out to them where they're screwing up once in a while. So perhaps if the Stoic sage even exists, they're not entirely without blind spots or contradictions. But, getting rid of the ones that are really hurting us, like in our soul, and then getting to some other ones where we find out like we're messing up other people, that seems to be easy for us to grasp, and we do grasp it by other people saying, what the hell's wrong with you? You say that you're like this, and
it's interesting you said that. About contradiction, I was having trouble. Actually, the first chapter of the book, I was one of the later chapters in terms of the actual writing.
Oh yeah.
And I was having trouble kind of coming up with a good framing of how I wanted to set up the problem. And one of the passages I came across, there's this, I can't tell you where it is in Discourses, but Epictetus talks about contradiction. And he says something along the lines of, you only really start figuring things out for real when you start dealing with the contradictions.
Yeah.
And that really helped me work through a little bit better some of the in my own head, thinking about ignorance and why do we end up in these, how do we get out of the state of ignorance? Well, it's when life keeps giving you signs that your thinking is contradictory, or
Yeah.
your thinking and your behavior, there's some sort of conflict happening there. And I know, like with myself and the way I framed it in the book, like, the way that I thought about being a husband versus the behaviors, there wasn't alignment. And so there was this clash and this conflict.
Yeah.
And there's only two ways to resolve that, right? Have a worse marriage or have a better one. And one of those, I have a role either way to figure out, but one of them I can actually go, okay, what is my part in this?
Yeah.
And what I realized is that the way that I was thinking about marriage was just contradictory to the role. Like, I wasn't understanding my own role well, and I was trying to create a reality that was contradictory to the natural role of what a good husband is. And it was just blowing up on me. And that's the natural outcome of contradiction, right? Or conflict. It's just chaos. It just blows up in you. You're literally in this state of confusion where you're like, I don't understand why this is happening. But for some reason, the natural impulse isn't, let me think about what my role is here. It's kind of trying to figure out how everyone else is responsible, or it's just the way things are, right?
Yeah.
It's
I think a lot of the time too, it's not, I don't understand why this is happening. It's, I don't understand why this is happening yet once again.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Right. Just, sometimes the guys in prison would say it's just like smashing your head against the wall, over and over again. And I loved when they would say that, because they told me you only really change when you're sitting around and you're just like, man, this isn't how I thought my life was going to go.
Yeah.
And so, the barriers for them, or the conflict for them can be much more in your face, right? Because it is walls and officers and things like that. And in a weird way, I think for those of us who end up in conflict, we have so many pathways of evasion of dealing with it. Right. And one of the things I say early on in the book is that kind of the way I feel like our modern society is set up in many ways is to avoid, there's just so many pathways out of dealing with ourselves. There's so many distractions. There's so many alternative conflicts we can get into that aren't with ourselves, but with others. There's so many ways that we just avoid ourselves rather than looking at ourselves and going, man, I showed up here and I didn't choose to show up here, but now that I'm here, I got to deal with myself first of all. And I think that for a lot of people, that's just really tough. I know it was tough for me. It was super hard for me until I realized, man, I'm going to ruin my life if I don't figure some of this stuff out.
So there's existential stakes, so to speak.
Totally. And I think that our society, it's just, I don't know if it's always been this way, so I don't want to I just feel like right now, I can just be like, hey, look, so I'm going to be on this for a while and not deal with myself. I think we do it all the time. I do it sometimes too, but it's just built to, we're looking for ways to not.
We're both old enough to remember the pre-internet and mobile technology and pre-social media days, and the effects of being stuck by yourself, being bored, and having to either think about things or find some ways to distract you. And you could turn on the TV, but there were only so many channels to watch or listen to the radio, right? Nowadays I would say it is much more difficult because there's so many easily accessible options. They have such low cost, right? If you wanted to distract yourself with watching a video, what would we have done when we were kids? We had to put a tape in the VCR or a DVD or something.
Watch an old movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you could just watch Facebook Reels or watch a video on Instagram or call up any one of the streaming services. So yeah, I think I think it is more difficult. I mean, and
It is,
that
and
might be one of the things with guys in prisons, right? A lot of those distractions are not available to them.
well, they, interestingly enough, they say that I've heard. I had at least one student who framed it in a way where he said, there's kind of three. I forget exactly how he framed it. He framed it as an either or, but it's like you can, one way you can deal with the just harshness of prison and just how difficult it is emotionally is you can do a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
But you can also sort of drug yourself out just by watching TV. And so
that's how so many guys, like, if you're going to get beaten up in prison, it'll usually because you went into debt, or,
sure. Uh-huh.
or, you're in a terrible place and it's totally gang dominated. I don't know what the New Mexico prisons are like, but some of the places you're kind of screwed. Right. But in a lot of other places, provided you don't gamble, do drugs, get in with the wrong crowd, you're probably not that at risk,
Mm-hmm. They obviously there's people who make, keep their heads down and just do the work and whatever.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me that there was a whole sort of cohort of people who literally just their goal is to just veg out.
Yeah.
And to try not deal with anything. And, it's sad because it obviously is very difficult, and that's a coping mechanism. And I sort of, I think one of the reasons that the subtitle, how to own your choices is even when it's difficult, we went with that title. Ownership is such a big part of the book, especially because when you're looking at things like distractions and things that are taking you away from yourself, as Epictetus says, they're taking you to some other thing that is distracting you from what the real business of life is, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that it's bad for things like to relax and to just not pay attention to your virtue. That's obviously true. It's good to relax and to just let your guard down and to not be sort of
can't
oh my
be
God, I need to be
maximizing stoicism all the time.
Yeah, you just can't, and I don't think it recommends that. But but there's this interesting way in which there is this part of our brain that definitely doesn't want to deal with who we are, and so what it's going to do is it's going to focus on something else. And so I didn't write about comfort in the book. I wrote about pleasure, but there's a lot of you could listen to people talk about it, and I always want to live a comfortable life.
Yeah.
I remember, sometimes people talk about retirement. They're just like, I just, want to get to a point in my life where I don't have any. They're basically saying I want a life without any adversity and any challenge, and I just want sort of smooth sailing. And I understand why people think that and believe it, because it's very much a part of our psychological nature. But it's not good either, because then you're so focused on not doing what is proper to you, that you end up just kind of stuck, not really progressing, just sort of not treating yourself with, to me, not really honoring what your moral purpose is, which is you should be figuring out ways to challenge yourself and grow and get better. And that's hard in life. And in some sense, I feel like it gets progressively harder as you get older, as you deal with new challenges, and you're sort of less, neuroadaptive.
You've
but
got less energy to deal with them.
Less energy to deal with it, but yet that's the lot. And I find that to be very interesting, and I think that generally the Stoics they're oppositional to this life in which you're not engaged in some sort of practice of how can I intentionally improve. It doesn't need to be like sleeping on the straw mat or whatever. I mean, some of those I think they're cool recommendations, but leaning into the things that challenge you on a daily basis. Okay, this is the one I'm going to pick today. If that's all the energy I got, then that's all the energy I got. But if this is the one I'm going to pick today, and then I'm going to call it, and I'm going to say, I don't have the energy to deal with other problems because I'm probably not going to deal with them well.
I was just thinking, I mean, there are these people in the Stoic communities that are very, very captivated with, voluntary endurance of discomfort. And they're like, I'm taking a cold shower this morning. And long ago, I started thinking, well, your life must be really going pretty well from that perspective if you actually have to seek out discomforts, because, plenty of people live in chronic pain, or, their neighbors are always noisy, or pick whatever you want, right? Their kids are waking up early and demanding breakfast, and then you got to take them to the soccer game, all these sorts of things. I think a lot of people, especially as we, like you said, as we get older and we have more responsibilities and things like that, we don't necessarily have to seek out obstacles or challenges. They're there. We got them. We just need to not kick them down the road, to future you, or take some sort of easy evasion, not to knock some people who are doing that sort of stuff. I mean, if your life is going along swimmingly and you need to take a cold shower, or
excellent, great for you.
Great,
I think that the challenges that I should say interest me more are the challenges where you're, out and about, and all of a sudden you're in just kind of you didn't ask for it, but here you are in a tough situation. It's tense. Maybe it's a, like a customer service situation that's not going well, or someone's being hostile, and you feel the challenge in that moment. And I know for myself anyway, sometimes it's like a feeling of aversion, like, oh, I don't want to deal with this right now,
Yeah.
But then I think that those moments, it's so easy to take the least effortful path, as opposed to asking yourself, and this is something that I write about in the book, which is, what does an admirable person do in this situation?
Yeah.
Sometimes it is just not engaging, right? I mean, there's nothing that's to say that's not admirable. But yet here you are feeling your patience tested. Well, understanding that's what's going on here is that it's not necessarily this person that is the problem. It's that I have a vice that I need to work on. And that vice is that, if it's something as silly as one of the, like you go to the grocery store and someone's paying with a check, and you're just like, man, this is, what are we doing here? This is not our day and age. And yet here you are, like, irritated, right? Well, I find myself sometimes in the situations, well, the reason I'm irritated is because I didn't plan appropriately. I didn't give myself enough time to do this. It's not, the store takes a check. It's not my job to tell the store that they shouldn't take checks. It's not my job to tell the customer they shouldn't be paying with a check. It's my job to sit in line and wait patiently, because what else can I do? I didn't manage my time well. Here I am. I just need to sit back and go, you know what? I'm going to be all right. And when I get to the checker, I need to be kind, and I need to be as good of a person as I should be. And I think that, to come back to that point, I think sometimes we design our lives to, and there's a smartness to designing your life without dealing with unnecessary adversities, right? But sometimes I think we kind of get into a pattern of life where we're over designing it to not deal with difficulties, when maybe we should be working more. Maybe we should be getting out and pushing our boundaries, because you can't grow in virtue if you're not taking on challenges. You're just, there's no growth there. You're just being what you already are. And so kind of intelligently pressing those boundaries is really important. And it's very important to set up conditions in which you can be at least safely tested, so that you grow over time to deal with the more insecure conditions.
Oh yeah. I mean, think of what a terrible idea it would be to throw yourself into challenges where, if you don't measure up, something catastrophic is going to happen. Like,
absolutely,
your family's going to die, or
absolutely. And a lot of people end up in the situations, right, where they get too far over their skis because they're chasing some external reward. They don't know what to deal with, to do with what happens. So they don't know how to manage it well. And then they end up making decisions that they regret, or they end up causing more chaos and pain to people that didn't deserve it or didn't need to be involved. And so I think that it's important to, one Well, I read a little bit about it in the book too. I mean, I have a long history of training martial arts, and it was one of the greatest things I ever did was kind of go in and get my ass kicked, because I learned that I had boundaries that needed to be tested, and
Yep.
and I didn't really appreciate that. But yet, what it gave me, especially the first school I started at in Los Angeles, Elite Training Center, shout out, they're a great school, was safely testing those boundaries, right? I'm in a group with a group of people who are all doing this. Everyone's pretty cool. The instructors have done a really good job of creating a nice environment to, get arm barred and tap out and be like, hey man, good job. Or to spar and get caught with a punch and be like, that was pretty legit, dude. Like, good striking, like you felt good about it, even when you failed.
Yeah.
And so to me, that exposed to me a whole new side of life. And Epictetus talks about this when he uses the metaphor of a wrestler, right? Life is like a wrestler. And so you should thank your training partners. They're stretching you out and teaching you to be more adaptable and flexible and to be stronger and more skilled. And I guess I found myself at a point where I don't really know what the point of life is if you're not trying to skill up in the most important ways, which for me, trying to be a better parent, trying to be better at all the things that I touch. And it's not to say by any means that I'm successful. I fail all the time, but the failure is the opportunity to look at it and go, okay, what's the choice here? There is a choice now. I either own the failure and make choices that are going to be better in the future by trying to figure out what I did wrong and how I can intervene here in a more successful way in the future. Or I can run away from that stuff, right? And try to design a more comfortable life. I'm not saying there isn't a part of me that wants that more comfortable life. I'm a human being. I do. There's a part of me that wants it, but there's this other part of me that looks at that and goes, is that really the goal? Is to just kind of never really be challenged in the best ways? And I find that I've learned that the ways that I've been challenged in life have given me the most benefit. Working through the stuff working through my dissertation and feeling like I failed and coming back to it and going, okay, why did I feel that way?
Yeah.
Well, I made bad choices. Doing martial arts and learning that I'm not the baddest ass around by any means. So having that ego check, working in prisons and standing in front of groups, not knowing how to respond, the adversity is an opportunity. And if we don't take hold of those opportunities or don't look at life as when those opportunities arise as, okay, I'm training, I'm constantly training, right? And I'm going through life looking at difficulties as opportunities to train. Then when the big ones hit, they may be so big that we don't have the skills to deal with it. But why wouldn't we try to give ourselves the opportunity to meet adversities with the best chances of success? It just, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me anymore to not try that, to not do that.
And that's an interesting way to frame it too. It doesn't make sense anymore. There was a point where maybe that did make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is a sign of development. There was one other thing that this is a good segue into that I wanted to bring up specifically about the book. And I think it's something that's a stumbling block for a lot of people who get attracted to Stoicism, because technically speaking, the relationships that we have are externals, right? And, so there's room in there. Friendship itself is a good. Virtue is not the only good. The Stoics are pretty clear that friendship is a good, but they don't say, your marriage is a good, or your relationship as a parent is a good. And I think you can say, well, that's implicit in the role ethics stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I like the book because you did stress quite a bit that how is all this going to play out? It will naturally flow into our relationships. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like, you've got your little core of you got your little virtues worked out here, and then you sort of deploy them to the people that are outside. If you're exercising virtue within a fabric of relationships, you're connected with your wife, your kids, your coworkers, well, now with having that restaurant, your customers, right? And
Mhm.
suppliers, and all of those other people. So I was kind of curious. It's a strong emphasis in this book. It's something that
Yeah.
I think gets left out in too much interpretation of Stoicism literature. It winds up being too individualistic. What drew you to taking that stance?
Yeah, I found that um so in the correctional environment, um relationships came up a lot.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be the biggest pain point. So, relationships between the incarcerated and officers
Yeah.
is a pain point, right? This relationship between the incarcerated and society, like the sense of punishment and dealing with other people have been involved in your life and done this. The relationship with their families on the outside,
Yeah. Yeah.
those things were so magnified. And then also, just interpersonal dynamics in prisons, respect and things like that. It it I wanted to really pin down, and I've always been, I think maybe for a very long time, but years and years and years, I've been trying to figure out exactly why virtue is the good. Let's put it that way in Stoicism, right?
Yeah.
Why virtue is the good. And I think maybe a very simplistic and possibly kind of dumb thing that I've used is like, what good is virtue on a desert island?
Okay. Yeah.
If you're on a desert island and you're completely alone,
I mean, some are easy to make a case for: temperance, courage, right? But justice.
Yeah, just like maybe
that.
Like if you're entirely alone, maybe like some sense of just like prolonging life, in itself. But I just have a hard time with that. I feel like if I lived on a desert island, I'd just be like, I don't know, man. I'm just gonna try to figure some stuff out, and just I don't know. But we don't think like that. Like almost everything we think about in life, and a lot of the psychological research points to this, like we're thinking about other people. Like we really are defaulting to our social relationships. And I thought, well, if virtue is a good, and yet our brains are always defaulting to this, the reason virtue is a good is because it really puts us in the best interpersonal position. That is, it may not necessarily mean that we are always going to have successful relationships, because relationships obviously depend on other people, right? I mean, relationships involve others, but I noticed that one of the things I caught in Epictetus that as I was working through a lot of this stuff was how much he talks about trustworthiness as a virtue.
Oh,
and he really, like, it comes out a lot. Like I was surprised at how much I found it, and I was like, why would trustworthiness be such an emphasis for Epictetus? Because trustworthiness like really involves other people. And I had this, as I mentioned earlier, I had this real felt experience of needing to be more trustworthy as a teacher in prison. And so one of the things that prison did for me is it made me see, like, when you strip off a lot of the social, a lot of society and like what the pleasures and the comforts and stuff we have, what a lot of those guys are looking for in prison are they want to trust people. They just don't have any really people they can trust. And I realized I needed to be that guy. Like I needed to be that, or else I'm not going to teach, because they're constantly being tested. Their trustworthiness is constantly being tested by others.
Yeah.
And so I kind of did this like almost like state of nature thing, whereas like in their state of nature, highly opportunistic state where there's not a lot of trustworthiness. Well, that just means trustworthy is so basic to our nature that what I started thinking about was, well, virtue really makes you the most trustworthy, reliable, dependable person, because people know exactly who you are. You say, I strive to generosity, right? So for anyone who's watching and meets me, now they know this about me. And now they can call me out in public, right? They can say, hey, that thing you did was not very generous. And that is, well, that's a problem for me. I need to potentially work on that.
That is a very interesting sort of like reframing of what it means to have a virtue in relation to another person. You are in effect you're being accountable to them, right? You say, okay, I'm a well, in my case, right, I've struggled with anger my whole life. I'm a calm, gentle person, and then I get pissed off and yell at somebody, and somebody can say, well, where's that virtue now, buddy?
Yeah. This is why ownership, in terms
that's
of the title
another
of the book,
really key term in
this is why ownership is, to me, the Stoic habit, is because you are going to fail at virtue. We all are going to find ourselves in conditions that are inhospitable to our being our best.
Yeah.
And you're going to fail. And there's only one solution to that failure, which is, this is up to me, right? I now have this choice, which is the primary choice, creates a new primary choice if I fail, which is, well, now I have to manage my failure. And I don't get to put that off on anybody else.
Yeah.
I need to own it. And I need to say, I have something I need to work on. And this is the thing I need to work on now, given what has happened in the situation. And I'm not saying that anytime anyone calls you out, you've failed. I mean, that's just not true.
Right.
But what it does bring about is that we are constantly asking people to enter into conditions of trust with each other. And there are people who are very good at manipulating that, and there are people who are good at exploiting it. But the better you are at working on the virtues also, right? Not only are you better at drawing good boundaries with other people and kind of seeing it. And so, hey, it seems like this is a situation in which someone is manipulating me, as opposed to actually trying to have a good relationship with me. I think you get better at drawing out those sorts of manipulations. And you also get very good at going, okay, when am I going to be doing stuff like that? And when is my worst nature going to come out? So you start being better at identifying the conditions under which you're going to make choices. Yeah. And that we know from psychological literature is like, understanding the circumstances in which you're making choices is so important to making good choices. We've all done this. You go to the store hungry, you end up buying a bunch of crap food because you put yourself in a bad situation.
Right.
So if you do not intervene at an intelligent point in that process, then you are likely going to make or set yourself up to make a bad choice. So I think it's very important to understand, like, what we want out of our relationships is security and trust. And we want a situation in which this person is somebody that, given the role, I can rely on them for this. And our job is to meet that expectation of what that role is. And that means understanding yourself very well, right? In this role, it is not my job to give somebody moral advice.
Yeah.
Like, here I am, I've got a book on this topic. It's something that I'm prone to. It's a flaw. Hey, Bob, calm down. You don't need to be a sage. You're not, you don't need to be some great wise teacher. You don't even have a relationship with this person. Just stop, right? That impulse is not appropriate to the situation. Learning to throw those brakes on and like understand who you are and what your role is. As you said, that the role is very important there, and understanding what your relationship is with another person. And then that is where you're trying to establish that relationship of trust. I'm going to be someone that you can count on in this way. And then so when someone maybe puts a demand on you that's too much, hey, that's not really my role here, right? I'm your friend in this regard, but like maybe not this regard. And that actually enables you to have tough conversations with people too, where I appreciated this and working in a correctional context. I had a hard time having tough conversations with guys about, sometimes they would engage in behaviors that I needed to kind of call out. And understanding what my role is as an instructor. And these are the rules, these are the policies. This is what a good instructor is. Excellence is implicit in the role. Drawing that boundary, it really helped me have difficult conversations where I felt good about the outcomes, and I could frame it to the person in a way where I would say, hey man, this is what's going on. This is why I'm having a tough time with this thing. And they appreciated me letting them know, because they understood it was about us and not about them. It was about us, right? We're in this together. And I need you to know that. And that worked really well in a correctional context because they understood that I'm not trying to disrespect them and they don't want to disrespect me.
Right.
So
right.
let's re-engage this relationship in a way that's a little bit healthier and a little bit more appropriate. And I think that if you focus on virtue as sort of being, and it makes sense, right? Like virtue having this connection, this really robust connection to relationships, then really what your job is to ask yourself is, hey, what is an excellent father? What is an excellent teacher? What is an excellent this? What is an excellent that? You ask good questions about what your role is. You start defining excellence for yourself. You start eliciting feedback because you start engaging in conversations where you're very interested in what other people have to say about how you're doing your role. And then your relationships get better because then people feel like they're a part of your life in a really meaningful way and you are listening and you care.
Yeah.
And what do we want more in life than like having meaningful, robust relationships with each other where we feel like people care about us and we care about them. And that's not going to happen without trust. Like it's just not going to be there. And that requires consistency, open communication. Like there's a whole suite of things in there that I think are really important that I went through life learning the hard way. So yeah, I think that to me, it's like Stoicism without focusing on relationships and calling virtue a good. I'm just like, I don't know. I'll show my cards here. I'm just not interested. Like it doesn't move me in any special way. It's really that the role, the nature of a role and excellence in my roles with other human beings, that interests me a lot. And I think that the psychological literature says, hey, as much as we know about human happiness really is about your relationships with other people. The better those are, the better it goes. The worse it is, the worse it goes. And that just means virtue really is such an important thing for building good relationships.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're making a really solid case there. And I do like that discussion of pistis, which is the Greek term that Epictetus uses like dozens of times throughout there. By the way, Marcus uses it a lot too.
Is that the translation?
That's what gets translated as trustworthiness or
okay.
fidelity. It depends on whose translation, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a bunch of them. And I mean, that shows up too in Cicero and Seneca, usually as fides or fidelitas. So it's there in them, but we're encumbered sometimes by the English translations, even in the same translation, not always being consistent, right? And then across different translators, sometimes it's tough to see those things. But I think that's really quite important. I think you can make a case that is actually part of the virtue of justice. And, the whole idea of the virtue of justice is it has to do with our social nature. We often like frame it, well, social nature, everybody out there, but I mean, why can't it also be like my relationship as a husband or
absolutely
like that? So yeah.
Well,
so
that's
I think
kind
that's
of
really
that.
quite helpful. Yeah.
There's that. I forget who uses it, but it's some more esoteric Stoic philosopher, but the concentric circles of
Heracles. Yeah.
Heracles. Yeah. So I like full admission, I am not great with the history of Stoicism. It's like one of my weakest parts of it because I'm more like the ideas more than I like
on
the
his
history.
thing. To be fair, we don't have much by him, and a lot of what we got is pretty fragmentary. So people have made a big deal out of that, but we don't really know much about this guy,
Yeah, but the idea of it is really nice though, right? I mean, like you do, like when we do think about our obligations to other people, like we do think about the people we're closest to first, and then we work our ways out, which is one of the reasons why I've always found like some of the more like aggressive utilitarian philosophies a little bit like it just doesn't really jive with our psychology. And it's just like, it's such a hard sell, like to think that I have the same obligations to like, I mean, maybe it doesn't, some of your views don't say that, but like I have obligations to strangers that are exact same to
you're right.
people closest to me.
Paradoxical, right? So a singer can be like, why are you spending money to make your kid happy when you could be benefiting 200 kids in some, poor area and getting more bang for your buck? And we're like, well, because it's my kid.
Well, so the argument, like I appreciate those arguments because they do challenge us to think about ways that we can be better and ways that maybe we aren't thinking about. but we shouldn't also, as a Stoic, I think, deny, like, there's a reason we really care about the people close to us, because these are the people that we're choosing to go through life with. And not only are we choosing to go through life with them, but there's been this implicit deal that we're kind of in the mix together.
Right.
And
Yeah.
And we're like, my kids didn't choose their parents. They just got their parents, right? And so there's this implicit deal there between us that, like, hey, we're going to try to manage this together, right? Because I love you and I'm going to continue to invest in you, and you need me in some way to give you support and to guide you. And so I need to focus on you in the most important ways. And then from there, if I'm focusing on those and I'm working on those, then I also think about, well, I also need to now go out part of that circle a little bit and go to my friends and maybe extended family. And then I go out a little more, and I'm thinking about my coworkers, and then I go out more. And I think that the real nice thing, one of the things that Stoicism does well, is like Seneca or Marcus who says it, like, you need to be the same person throughout each of those circles. So we look at that, as people talk about, is it Hierocles? Is that the guy? So as people talk about that, right, they think of that like two-dimensionally, but there's also like this three-dimensionality of it too. Like, I need to not only be in all of these circles, I need to be the same Bob in all of these circles. That is, if I'm dealing with a coworker and a coworker says something that makes me feel like I've lost trust, it's no different in writing that than it is with my kid, in a sense. Like, I need to do the actions now that are going to regain the trust, because that is my role.
And conversely, if your kid sees you behaving in a totally different way with your coworker than you do with them, that they're going to call you on that. Well, this is a good place to kind of wrap up. Once again, I do want to, for people who are watching, I recommend the book again. You've been very generous with your time and thought on this. And I've actually learned some good stuff on the way in this conversation. So any last thoughts that you want to throw out there briefly? Or
I mean, my mind's swimming right now after conversations like this. It's great. I'm sure I'll have 1,000 ideas when this is over, and I'll be like thinking about it all night and talking to my wife. Oh, I wish I would have said that. I would have said this. No, I think that one of the, maybe just one last idea that I think that maybe distinguishes what I'm trying to say in this book from other stuff that's the prolific Stoic literature that's coming out right now, is that I want to, and I think you've actually written on this a little bit, is that when Epictetus talks about the distinction between what is up to us, what is not, what is in our power, what is not, I think that there's a sense in which maybe it's translational, maybe it's just interpretation, but I want to really make that idea of ownership central to what he's talking about there, because when he talks about our power, that sense, the dunamis, like we have the capacity to bring about events in the world, right? And events in ourselves. And I think that there's this commentary that's happening in the world right now around, people frame it as a dichotomy of control. And that's been very popularized, and I want to push back on that. And to me, it's more of a dichotomy of ownership, right? You have power over one thing, and that is your choice, and you don't have power over other things. So your actual greatest ability to bring about anything in the world is your choice. And we are very good at making excuses for not recognizing our own power. And that comes out a lot in Epictetus, especially, which is why I tend to talk most about Epictetus. But I want that message of Stoicism to that empowerment message. It's not about necessarily control, which has value. It's about empowerment. It's about becoming somebody that you can really admire and appreciate, because you are getting better at being the kind of person that you want to be in your relationships with other human beings. That tracks so much with what we've learned from psychological research that I want to do my best to shift the messaging there away from control to what I think is actually more of the sort of ancient Greek and the ancient Greek message coming that is sort of built into early Stoicism, which is that you have the potential to be so much more if you just look at yourself and say, you know what, I have this power. I need to take ownership of it, and I need to not make excuses and give that ownership to anyone else. There's no one else that is responsible for my choices. There's no one else to blame. It is up to me. This moment is as good of a moment as any other moment in your life to say, I'm done. I'm done blaming anyone. I'm done putting my accountability on others. I've got some stuff I need to take accountability for. And it seems like a lot of hard work, and it's like just like this tunnel, right, that you're looking down with like a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And I feel like I've been there. And eventually, if you start putting in the work, it just starts feeling normal. And when you get called out for things, when you make a mistake, yes, you do get that feeling of a tightness in your chest, and you feel your, everything. But then what else do I do here other than go, yeah, let's work through this. Let's figure this out. I'm not, maybe I'm wrong. And I feel like the message of Stoicism is just a little lost right now in terms of there's so much focus on the dichotomy of control that essentially what people are getting is they're feeling better because they're dealing with maybe their emotions in a little more productive way. And Stoicism can do that for you. But what Stoicism is really offering you is a very clear path to growth and becoming your best person, which is actually going to be the most satisfying life.
Well, that's a great place to bring it to a sort of inspiring close. Nice job there. So thanks so much for joining me for this, and I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm happy I did it.